Picture this. It's the final, chaotic months of World War II. The frigid waters of the Baltic Sea are about to become the stage for the worst maritime disasters in human history. But these stories, these thousands of lives, they were just swallowed by the sea, and then buried by the silence of a world that was desperate to just move on. Well, today, we're pulling that story back to the surface.
Look at this number, almost 9,500. Now, that's not a statistic from some long military campaign. That is the estimated number of men, women, and children who died when a single ship went down. To put that into perspective for you, it's more than 6 times the number of lives lost in the one disaster that has captivated the world for over a century.
Right. Everybody knows the story of the RMS Titanic. Its tragedy is part of our culture, it's in movies, it's everywhere. But the MV Wilhelm Gustloff? The loss of life was just staggering in comparison. It is by far the deadliest single-ship sinking in history. And yet, for most of us, it's a name we have probably never, ever heard.
And the thing is, the Gustloff wasn't some isolated incident, not at all. Just weeks later, another ship, a repurposed freighter called the MV Goya, was torpedoed in the very same waters. It sank in less than 4 minutes, taking thousands more people with it into those icy depths. It became an equally tragic, but somehow even more forgotten catastrophe.
So that brings us to the big question, right? Why? Why have these colossal tragedies, disasters that dwarf so many others we know by heart, been almost completely erased from our collective memory? To find the answer, we have to go back and really understand the desperate circumstances of their final voyages.
So we need to go back to the winter and spring of 1945. On the Eastern Front, everything is collapsing. The Soviet Red Army is advancing with unbelievable speed across Prussia, and literally millions of German civilians and soldiers find themselves trapped with their backs to the coast of the Baltic Sea.
In a last-ditch effort to save them, Germany launched Operation Hannibal, and the sheer scale of this is just mind-blowing. You know, we've all heard about the evacuation at Dunkirk, right? Well, Operation Hannibal dwarfed it, evacuating over 2 million people in just 15 weeks. The Baltic Sea was their only way out, but it was also a hunting ground, teeming with Soviet submarines.
The fleet that they put together was this motley collection of anything that could float. You had grand luxury liners like the Wilhelm Gustloff you see here, packed way, way beyond capacity. And right alongside them were humble cargo ships, fishing boats, you name it. If it could float, it was pressed into service for this huge, desperate mission.
And this is where the MV Goya comes in. You have to understand, this was a simple Norwegian freighter. It was built for cargo, not people. It had none of the safety features you'd expect on a passenger ship, no watertight compartments, and nowhere near enough lifeboats. And yet, on its last voyage, it was crammed with thousands of souls, just a floating vessel of hope in a sea of war.
Okay, so let's zoom in on the final, fateful hours of the Goya's journey. Just try to imagine the scene. The air is absolutely frigid. The sea is pitch black, and somewhere deep beneath the waves, a Soviet submarine is watching and waiting.
So, on the evening of April 16th, the Goya leaves the Bay of Danzig, packed with around 6,700 refugees. But then, disaster strikes in the form of a fatal delay. Another ship in their tiny convoy has engine trouble, and it forces the whole group to stop for 20 minutes. That was all the time the Soviet submarine L-3 needed. Just before midnight, it fired. 2 torpedoes slammed into the Goya's hull.
Less than 4 minutes. That's all it took. Because it was a freighter, basically a hollow cargo ship, there was nothing to stop the water from rushing in. It went down with absolutely shocking speed. It gave the thousands of people packed inside almost no time to react. The ship, it just vanished. The attack itself was over in an instant, but the real horror, for anyone who was thrown into the freezing Baltic in the dead of night, well, that was just beginning.
You can only imagine the chaos. In the pitch black, screams filled the air as thousands of people struggled in near-freezing water. Hypothermia would have set in within just a few minutes. For the vast, vast majority, there was just no hope of rescue, zero chance of survival.
The numbers really lay the tragedy bare. Of the roughly 6,700 people on the Goya, only 183 were pulled from the water alive. It's an almost incomprehensible loss. Think about it. More than 6,500 people were gone in just a few minutes.
Which brings us right back to our original question. With a death toll this high, how could the story of the Goya and the others like it possibly be forgotten? How does that even happen? Well, there are a few key reasons. The sinking happened just weeks before the war in Europe ended, so it was completely overshadowed by headlines of victory, and of course the horrifying revelations from the concentration camps. In the chaos of post-war Europe, this story just got lost. And, there was also a real complexity back then in telling a story about German civilian suffering. Without a big media narrative in the West to keep the story alive, it just faded away.
So for decades, the story stayed buried. But the sea itself? Well, the sea held on to the evidence. The Baltic Sea does not forget. And as it turns out, its unique chemical makeup makes it one of the world's greatest preservers of history.
So what is it that makes the Baltic so special? Well, unlike most oceans, its water is cold, it has low salinity, that's called brackish water, and it's really low in oxygen. Now that combination creates a terrible environment for the little shipworms and bacteria that normally just devour wooden shipwrecks. And the result is that ships that sank hundreds of years ago can be found today in an incredible state of preservation.
And the results are just astonishing. I mean, look here. We see an old painting of a steamship as it used to be, and right next to it, a wreck from World War II sitting on the bottom of the Baltic, still remarkably intact. It's literally like looking into a time capsule. The sea is acting as an underwater museum preserving these sites of human tragedy with this haunting clarity.
This quote, I think, really captures it perfectly. The bottom of the Baltic isn't just a graveyard. It's an archive of our shared history. Yeah, it tells stories of trade and friendship, but also of conflict and immense tragedy. And these are stories that belong to all of us, even the ones that have been forgotten for a while.
Rediscovering wrecks like the Goya and the Gustloff forces us to remember a really painful, overlooked chapter of history. And it reminds us that the sea is really the world's largest museum, and that some of its greatest secrets are still down there, waiting in the dark, cold depths to be found.